you're still alive.
I know a lot of people are intimidated or just outright not interested in the style of gameplay that's offered by the Monster Hunter series. If you're someone who has a passing interest in the world of Monster Hunter, but has never truly gotten into the series, Capcom's spin-off series Monster Hunter Stories might just be your gateway into this incredible world. Monster Hunter Stories 2 Wings of Ruin is the sequel to 2016's Monster Hunter Stories for Nintendo 3DS. Unlike the action gameplay of the main series, Stories is a more traditional turn-based RPG with a monster collection mechanic like Pokemon. The story opens on a festival in your home village of Mahana on Hakolo Island. A gorgeous cutscene plays out with impressive voice acting and animation that really sets the stage for the rest of the game. But like most RPGs, the happy good times end quickly, as the festival suddenly goes awry and Rathalos are seen flying away from the village. Eventually, you get your own Rathalos that acts as your main companion, but there might be something sinister going on under all those scales. Teamed up with Wyverian Enna and oblong-headed navigation feline Naviru, the stage is officially set. I won't get into any more specifics of the story for spoilers' sake, but this is the inciting incident that sends you on your journey. Before moving on to the gameplay, I want to clarify that you are not required to have played the original Monster Hunter Stories to enjoy the sequel story. However, the game does reference events and characters from the first game quite often, but it plays off more as a treat for veterans than anything earth-shatteringly important. The battles in Monster Hunter Stories 2 pit you, your monster bestie, called a Monstie, and a buddy rider with their Monstie against wild monsters from the Monster Hunter universe. Calling back to the action and reaction style gameplay of the main series games, the core element of the battle system plays out like rock, paper, scissors. Power attacks beat technical, technical beats speed, and speed beats power. This is the essential knowledge you need to engage in the game's battles. That sounds simple on the surface, but paired with the introduction of weapon physiology, the system is just deep enough to be both engaging and rewarding. Monsters will not choose power, technical, or speed at random. They use attacks based on the type of monster they are and what state they're currently in. This is where knowledge of the main series of games can be useful. Velocidrome, for example, is a known speedster in the main series games. So naturally, when you fight it, it typically uses speed attacks. During the course of a battle, a monster will eventually become enraged, and in the case of Velocidrome, that means it'll start utilizing power attacks. New to this game is weapon physiology and monster parts. Certain parts of a monster, such as their head or wings, can be broken to net you extra items, and also change the way the opposing monster fights. These different parts are weak to different types of weapon physiology, being cutting weapons, piercing weapons, and blunt weapons. This is a huge callback to the main series of Monster Hunter, and a very welcome addition to the combat. The combat in the original was fine, but it didn't quite offer that level of satisfaction and strategy. These new features layered on the core rock, paper, scissors mechanic offer exactly the kind of depth you'd expect from a turn-based RPG. This system is really cool and rewarding for players of the main series games, as they can use their existing knowledge to make decisions in battle. Just like classic Monster Hunter, you'll take your spoils from battle to the smithy to craft weapons and armor to make yourself stronger. It's a much simplified version of the real deal, but that fits nicely into this gameplay experience. Rather than crafting all 5 pieces of a single armor set, it's simply a single set that you craft once. As for the weapons, there's 2 of every type of weapon physiology: swords and shields, great swords, hammers, hunting horns, gun lances, and bows are all available. Consider the physiology of the weapons when crafting, but most of all, use what looks cool to you. So, we've covered your rider, but what about your Monsties? Monsties cannot be directly controlled in the same way that Pokemon can be. They have minds of their own and will attack according to their own patterns. So it's advantageous to bring a monster into battle that counters the style of attack of the monster you're currently fighting. If you and your Monstie perform an appropriate counterattack in a head-to-head against the opposing monster, you'll utilize a double attack, deal more damage, and negate the enemy's attack altogether. Your Monsties may not always do what you want them to, and that can be frustrating. Thankfully, you do have the ability to order them to use their inherent skills in order to get them to use the kind of attack you need them to. The more double attacks you pull off, the faster the kinship gauge will fill up. You use this gauge to use your skills, your monstie skills, and most importantly, kinship attacks. These are super powerful attacks you utilize alongside your monstie by hopping on their backs. You can think of them like Z attacks from Pokemon Sun and Moon. They have super satisfying, over-the-top, crazy animations that really show off the personality of your monsties. You can even use these in tandem with your buddy rider for even more powerful versions of these same moves. They're great eye candy, which can fortunately be skipped after you've inevitably seen them for the 300th time. Speaking of, you can actually increase battle speed up to 3 times if you're feeling a little fatigued by all the combat animations. I probably spent around 70% of my battle gameplay at 3 times speed just to keep things moving. There's also a handy quick finish feature that lets you instantly win battles that you're overpowered for, while retaining the experience and materials won from battle. So now that we've talked about how to use your monsties in combat, we need to discuss how you obtain them. And how do you do that? Egg poaching, naturally. In all seriousness, monster dens will spawn in the overworld while you explore. If you enter one, you'll be met with a preset procedurally generated dungeon filled with items, monsters, and the all-important monster eggs. These dungeon designs are pretty limited, so you'll see a lot of the same layouts over and over again. But I never found that this impeded my enjoyment of the game. However, I do wish that there was more going on in these environments. Once you've reached the end of a monster den, you'll be able to snag a monster egg to take with you. They have various colors and patterns that hint to you what kind of monster will be inside. If you pick up an egg you don't like, you can simply try and grab a different one. Be careful though, eventually the eggs run out, and sometimes you'll be ambushed by the owner of the egg nest. Your companion feline Naviru makes sure to tell you this over and over and over and over again. Look Naviru, you're cute and all, but after 60 hours of gameplay I think I know how this works. If you want a specific monstie, you can try throwing a paintball at it in battle when it's weak to get it to retreat to its den for a chance at one of its eggs. There's also additional methods to get a monster to retreat that can be found in the in-game Monsterpedia. These range from using specific weapons, to breaking specific monster parts, to some very overly specific interactions in battles, such as defeating a monster with a specific attack after inflicting a specific ailment. These aren't required to get the eggs you want, but they can certainly help. Take your egg back to a monstie stable, hatch it, and see what you get. All monsties will hatch at level 1, but don't be afraid to add them to your party, because they will get bonus experience points until they eventually catch up to the rest of your team. I really love this mechanic because it allows me to change up my team whenever I want and not be worried about my monsties being too weak to battle. A minor complaint I have is that a whole lot of the monster cast is carried over from the first game, with the majority of new additions naturally coming from Monster Hunter World. A lot of the game will feel familiar to players of the original. I'm all for bringing the cast forward, but it really overshadows the new monsters in Monster Hunter Stories 2. You can carry up to 12 eggs with you while you're out in the field, so don't worry about running back after every single egg to see what you got. Speaking of the field, you might find rocks you can't break or jumps that you can't make. That's because your monsties handle that for you. Monsties have different kinds of ride actions that behave similarly to Pokemon's HMs. These are moves solely used for exploration. Thankfully, none of the moves, save for one, are actually necessary to progress the story. But if you want to snag rare items along the way, you're gonna need them. This is one part of the game that I found to be really frustrating. I think the idea of using your monsties in the overworld is neat, but there are so many ride actions and only 6 available monstie slots in your party. When trying to manage that as well as make sure you have a balanced power, tech, and speed team, you'll find that it's pretty hard to manage. More than a few times, I found that I didn't have the action I needed because I just put away a certain monstie to make room for a cool new one that I just got. Simply, this is an element to the game that just doesn't need to be here. Over the course of the adventure, you'll meet some new and old faces that will fight alongside you in battle. They come with their own monsties and weapons and behave of their own accord. Bumping the battles from 2 members to 4 certainly adds depth, but the main reason this was done was to make room for co-op multiplayer. Stories 2 offers multiplayer quests, monster dens, and battles to be played with your friends and others via local and online multiplayer. Simply head to the quest board, pick out the quest you want to do, link up with a buddy, and you're off! These send you to instance dungeons pulled from the same presets that you'll find in the main game. You and your buddy act independently of one another and can either act as a team or split up and take on multiple enemies. If a player initiates a battle while another is off somewhere else, they can actually join the fray mid-battle. It's a really nice setup. The new depth to the battle system makes the idea of teaming up with a friend really enjoyable, and I implore you to give it a shot if you try out the game. Multiplayer is the core of the main Monster Hunter experience, and I'm glad that they brought that experience to the solo-driven story series. Capcom has provided the roadmap for future free content updates, and a lot of it is multiplayer focused, so keep that in mind if you're interested in everything Stories 2 has to offer. In terms of accessibility, Stories 2 gives you plenty of tools to be successful in battle if you're new to Monster Hunter or turn-based RPGs. Every town has a prayer pot, which you can use to increase your experience intake, your attack power, your defense, and even how much your items sell for, among other things. Give it the appropriate charms, and it will give you that buff for 30 minutes times the amount of charms you gave it. So, if you feel a certain part of the game is becoming a touch too difficult, you can utilize the prayer pot to give yourself an edge. It's certainly not required to beat the game, but you can also upgrade your weapons and armor to continue to make yourself stronger and more resilient to damage. I was able to beat the game without upgrading much of anything. I spent a lot of time just crafting new gear instead. If you're looking to up your challenge, the excellent post-game has a lot to offer on that front. I won't get into specifics, but just know that there's plenty to do after the credits roll. Just don't expect there to be any more plot. We need to talk about presentation. This game is gorgeous. From beautiful saturated colors and environments, empowering orchestral music, truly exceptional voice acting, this game has it all. If you're playing on PC. I'm sad to say that this game struggles on Nintendo Switch. It flutters between 20 and 30 FPS and noticeably chugs during some of the more spectacular attacks and cutscenes. If you're sensitive to low frame rate and have access to a PC, I have to suggest you play it on PC. That said, this is a turn-based RPG, and for some, frame rate is not going to make or break the experience. Just keep it in mind. It took me about 40 hours to beat the main quest of Monster Hunter Stories 2, and that was with a fair amount of side questing. I think it's the perfect length for the story, which isn't award-winning or anything, but has some really incredible moments. Post-game included, I'm at 60 hours with no end in sight. This game has a ton to offer, from the sheer amount of monsties to collect, side quests to complete, gear to craft, and multiplayer quests to do. Just what you'd expect from a Monster Hunter game. Monster Hunter Stories 2 Wings of Ruin is an incredible game from start to finish. It's a beautiful game with a really unique battle system that stays true to the series' roots. Whether you're a Monster Hunter veteran or a new player looking to immerse yourself in the world of Monster Hunter in a different way, Wings of Ruin is the perfect game. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this review, please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/gvgaming so we can create more videos just like this. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to stay up to date with everything we're doing. In the words of Naviru,